Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind one of the most polished illusions of 1950s America. In the old photographs, a young woman stands beneath a glittering crown holding a bouquet while an auditorium applauds. The picture looks glamorous and effortless, but it does not show the aching feet, the tight gown, or the hairpins pressing against her scalp. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into the parts of old America the advertisements forgot to mention. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan and pull the blanket up, because tonight we're going back to a time when beauty was not simply admired. It was measured, rehearsed, corrected, and eventually placed beneath a crown. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1955. Your hair has been set overnight in rollers, your waist is being held in place by a garment with the flexibility of industrial machinery, and your mother has already reminded you 3 times not to slouch. In a few hours, several respected local businessmen will decide whether you represent the ideal American woman. The auditorium is already warm when you arrive. Flowers line the stage, flags stand beside the curtains, a polished microphone waits beneath the brightest lights, and a long judging table is covered with a white cloth. Everything about the room insists that this is an official and respectable celebration of talent, education, community, and civic pride. Backstage, the atmosphere is much less orderly. The dressing room is crowded with garment bags, powder compacts, perfume bottles, spare stockings, curling irons, and mothers trying to remain calm. One contestant is looking for a missing glove, another has discovered a loose seam, and someone's collapsing hairstyle is being rebuilt with the seriousness of emergency construction. Near the mirror, a contestant practices her smile. It must look warm from the judges' table, confident without appearing desperate, and cheerful without revealing exhaustion. This is a remarkable amount of responsibility for one facial expression, but many contestants have spent months learning how to produce it whenever required. They have rehearsed their walks in living rooms and dance studios. They have practiced where to place their feet, how to turn at the end of the stage, and how long to pause before the pause begins to look unnatural. The purpose of all this practice is to make the practice disappear, because the ideal contestant must look naturally graceful, naturally slender, and naturally delighted to be examined by strangers. Then the orchestra begins and the contestants step beneath the lights. The audience becomes a dark shape beyond the edge of the stage, but the judges remain clearly visible behind their score sheets. One may be a banker, another may own the local department store, and another may represent the company sponsoring the event. You begin walking with your shoulders back and your chin lifted. One heel feels less stable than it did during rehearsal, but you keep smiling. Your mother is somewhere in the audience carrying months of hope, fittings, lessons, and family expenses into the room with you. At the center of the stage, you pause, turn, and face the judges. Their pencils begin moving, and you will probably never know what they write. One judge may prefer blonde hair, another may dislike the color of your gown, and a third may decide that your carefully trained smile looks too rehearsed. The pageant requires a very specific kind of emotional discipline. A contestant may feel nervous, but she must not look nervous. She may want the crown desperately, but she must behave as though participation alone is enough, and if another woman wins, she must begin applauding before the disappointment has fully reached her. And yet many women genuinely wanted to be there. Some loved performing, some wanted scholarships or travel, and some simply wanted to become visible beyond the limits of an ordinary small-town life. The pageant could be thrilling and exhausting at the same time, and both feelings could be completely real. Soon one contestant hears her name while another hears someone else's. The crown is placed, the bouquet is handed over, and the photographer's flash turns the moment into history. In the photograph, everything looks perfect, but behind the flowers, the stage, and the smiling young woman, the machinery of sponsors, advertising, and business is already moving. Before the crown touched anyone's carefully arranged hair, the money had already arrived. The auditorium had been rented, the flowers had been ordered, the programs had been printed, and several local businesses had quietly decided that a smiling young woman in a sash would be excellent for publicity. The pageant described itself in the language of opportunity, education, community service, and civic pride. Some of those promises were genuine, but beneath them was a simple commercial truth. Beauty attracted attention, attention attracted audiences, and audiences were very useful when someone had dresses, cosmetics, newspapers, or automobiles to sell. Imagine that you own a small department store in 1954. For a modest contribution, your name appears in the pageant program Contestants. Visit your fashion department for fittings, and the winner wears one of your dresses during the town parade. An advertisement can claim that your store sells elegance, but a beauty queen wearing your dress makes elegance look officially approved. At the centre of this arrangement stood the contestant. She paid the entry fee, purchased the gown, travelled to the event, posed for photographs, attended rehearsals, and persuaded relatives to buy tickets. She was the competitor, the entertainment, the advertisement, and sometimes the person paying for the privilege of being all three. The cost rarely ended with one dress. There were professional headshots, a swimsuit, an evening gown, a talent costume, shoes, gloves, jewellery, hair appointments, makeup, coaching, hotel rooms, meals and travel. Each expense seemed manageable alone, but together they formed a total that many families preferred not to calculate too carefully. You are a father in 1956 and your daughter has advanced to the state competition. The old gown is still beautiful, but the coach explains that the state judges will notice quality. You study the hotel, cost the travel expenses and the price of a new dress, then call it an investment, because that sounds more hopeful than an expense with a very uncertain return. Most contestants did not win, but every contestant brought money and attention into the event. Families paid audiences, bought tickets, photographers sold portraits, salons styled hair, and hotels filled rooms. The pageant needed many hopeful young women to produce one crowned winner, and the financial risk belonged mostly to the women who went home without the crown. Local pageants created small temporary economies wherever they appeared. Florists supplied bouquets, restaurants served visiting families, newspapers sold extra copies, seamstresses altered gowns, and car dealerships loaned convertibles for parades. The pageant was not merely an evening of entertainment. It was a business network wearing evening gloves. At the national level, the commercial machinery became much larger. Miss Universe launched in 1952 with close ties to Catalina Swimwear, placed contestants from different countries on a stage where swimwear was one of the main attractions. It was described as an international celebration of beauty, and it was also an extremely effective product display. Television made the arrangement even more valuable. A local pageant could sell seats in an auditorium, but a televised pageant could sell millions of viewers to advertisers. Cosmetics companies, clothing manufacturers, and beauty brands could place their products beside women who'd already been judged, applauded, and presented as the ideal. The winner quickly became more than a young woman with a crown. She appeared at department stores, civic ceremonies, parades, product events, and ribbon cuttings. Her face carried the authority of public approval, which made her useful to sponsors long after the applause inside the auditorium had ended. The crown could bring scholarships, travel, confidence, friendships, and real opportunities. It could also bring contracts, appearance schedules, approved clothing sponsor obligations, and rules governing how the winner behaved in public. The prize was genuine, but it was also a job whose full description usually arrived after the celebration. None of this meant the contestants were foolish, or the organisers were secretly plotting behind the curtains. Many people sincerely believed they were helping young women while also benefiting from the publicity. Generosity and commercial interest stood together beneath the same stage lights, smiling for the same photograph. and the business required a steady supply of contestants who could walk correctly, answer safely, smile continuously, and represent a sponsor without appearing to sell anything. Beauty queens did not arrive fully prepared. Long before the judges opened their scorecards, families had already begun teaching little girls how to stand, speak, perform, and be chosen. A 1950s beauty queen was rarely created during the week before the competition. In many families, the preparation began years earlier, when a little girl was first taught that standing correctly, smiling sweetly, and entering a room gracefully were not merely manners. They were investments in the woman she might become. Imagine that you're 8 years old in 1952. On Saturday morning, other children are riding bicycles or watching cartoons, while you're standing in a dance studio with your heels together, your shoulders back, and a teacher explaining that graceful girls never allow their arms to hang awkwardly. The lessons may begin with ballet tap dancing, piano singing, or baton twirling. These activities are presented as healthy accomplishments, but they also serve a practical purpose. One day a pageant judge may ask what you can do, besides look pleasant, and your family intends to have an answer ready. Posture is treated with particular seriousness. You walk across the living room with a heavy book balanced on your head while your mother watches from the sofa. If the book falls, you begin again because gravity is believed to be an honest teacher, and the ideal young woman is not expected to slouch. You are also taught how to receive compliments. An ordinary child may look at the floor, laugh nervously, or hide behind her mother when an adult calls her pretty. A future contestant learns to look directly at the speaker, smile calmly and say, "Thank you," as though the compliment has been received many times before. The pageant smile begins here as well. You practice in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the lips, the chin, and the eyes until your expression looks cheerful without appearing silly. Long before you understand the pressure of competition, your face is already learning how to perform confidence. Speaking lessons may follow. You're reminded not to mumble, rush speak too loudly, or use words that sound careless. A polished young woman must be easy to understand, pleasant to hear, and careful enough to express an opinion without making the adults in the room regret asking for it. Your mother may become the manager of the entire operation. She arranges lessons, remembers deadlines, finds costumes, saves newspaper clippings, speaks with teachers, and watches other girls closely enough to know which talents are becoming common and which might still attract attention. The family calendar begins to bend around the project. Saturdays disappear into rehearsals, local contests, fittings, and long drives to auditoriums in neighbouring towns. Vacations may be planned around competition dates, while brothers and sisters quietly learn that this weekend belongs to the pageant. The expenses grow slowly enough to appear reasonable. One dance class becomes a year of lessons. One recital costume becomes several competition outfits. Professional photographs, coaching shoes, music and travel enter the family budget one modest payment at a time. And what does the girl herself want? Sometimes she wants the crown as deeply as everyone around her does. She enjoys the applause, the costumes, the friendships, and the satisfying feeling of improving at something that adults clearly consider important. In other cases, wanting becomes more complicated. A girl may continue because her mother is proud, because the lessons have already consumed years, or because nobody has seriously asked what she would prefer to do instead. Children are very good at wanting what the people they love have taught them to want. This does not make every pageant childhood unhappy. Some girls gained confidence, discipline, musical ability, public speaking skills, and friendships that lasted long after the costumes were packed away. But even the happiest contestant learned that approval followed certain behaviors more reliably than others. Stand straight and the adults smile. Perform well and the family celebrates. Gain weight, lose focus, speak too bluntly, or appear insufficiently grateful, and the room changes slightly. Nobody needs to explain the lesson directly, because the lesson is repeated through attention, praise, silence, and correction. And, by adolescence, the training may feel almost natural. The girl knows how to enter a room, how to meet a stranger, how to hold her shoulders, and how to switch on the approved expression before anyone reaches for a camera. She now looks like someone who was born with poise. The years of lessons, corrections, family sacrifice, and careful ambition have disappeared inside the performance exactly as they were meant to. And once a young woman had been trained to look ready, the next question was whether the pageant organisation would allow her onto the stage at all. Before the gown and the crown came the forms, the photographs, the references, and the quiet investigation into whether she was considered the right kind of girl. Long before a contestant stepped beneath the lights, she had to convince the pageant organisation that she belonged there. Beauty alone was not enough. She needed the correct photographs, the correct references, the correct background, and the reassuring appearance of a young woman who would never embarrass the town that placed its name across her sash. The application arrived as a collection of forms and instructions. There were spaces for age, address, education, hobbies, talent, community involvement, and personal ambitions. Each answer appeared simple, but together they created a quiet examination of whether the applicant fit the pageant's idea of respectable womanhood. The photographs carried particular weight. A casual snapshot taken beside the family car would not be sufficient. Families hired professional photographers to produce carefully lit headshots and full-length portraits that made the contestant appear polished, approachable, and already prepared for public attention. Choosing the photographs could become a family debate. One image made her look too serious, another too glamorous, while a third showed the correct smile but an unflattering angle of the shoulders. The final photograph had to say everything the judges wanted to know before the young woman entered the room. References were often required as well. A teacher, minister, employer, or respected community leader might be asked to confirm that the contestant was not merely attractive, but responsible, well-mannered, trustworthy, and worthy of representing the community. This meant that private reputation became part of the competition. A young woman's chances could depend on whether adults at school, church, or work considered her the right kind of girl. Beauty could be seen in a photograph, but character had to be certified by someone with social authority. Eligibility rules reached even further into a contestant's personal life. Many pageants required applicants to be unmarried, never previously married, and without children. The ideal beauty queen was expected to represent possibility, innocence, and availability, all carefully preserved within the approved boundaries of the era. Some competitions imposed residency rules, age limits, religious expectations, or restrictions based on previous titles. A contestant might be considered perfect for the stage and still be rejected because she lived on the wrong side of a county line or had already entered the wrong competition. The rules were presented as neutral administration, but they quietly decided what kinds of women could be visible. A pageant did not simply choose a winner from everyone who applied. It first reduced the group to those whose lives already matched the image the organisation wanted to display. In a small town, applying was rarely private. Neighbours heard about it, church members formed opinions, and family friends began discussing whether the girl had the right personality for public attention. By the time the application reached the pageant office, the community had already begun judging. Then came the waiting. Somewhere a committee reviewed the forms, studied the photographs, read the references, and decided which young women would be invited forward. The process looked orderly, but every decision carried personal preferences, local expectations, and unspoken ideas about class, family reputation, and proper behaviour. If the acceptance letter arrived, the household shifted immediately into preparation. Lessons became more serious, a gown had to be chosen, and the competition calendar took over the family's attention. If the rejection arrived instead, it was usually brief, polite, and offered no useful explanation. The applicant was expected to receive that disappointment gracefully. She might never know whether the problem was her photograph, her measurements, her family background, her references, or a judge's private impression of what kind of woman the pageant needed that year. The application had already taught her the first major rule of the competition. Before anyone measured her waist or scored her walk, the organization had measured her life. And once she was accepted, the measuring would become much more literal. Once the application was accepted, the pageant's interest moved from the contestant's reputation to the exact arrangement of her body. A tape measure appeared, a scale was placed on the floor, and qualities once described vaguely as beauty were translated into inches, pounds, and proportions. Imagine that you're standing in a hotel dressing room in 1956 while a woman with a clipboard measures your bust, waist, and hips. You hold your arms slightly away from your body, breathe as normally as possible, and pretend that this is no more personal than having a dress altered. The numbers are written down without ceremony. Height, weight, waist, hips, and bust become part of the official description of who you are. A journalist may later print them beside your name, hometown, and talent, as though the dimensions of your body are basic public information. The ideal silhouette of the decade is described as naturally feminine, although producing it often requires considerable engineering. The waist should be narrow, the bust full, the hips rounded, and every curve arranged in the precise proportion that fashion magazines have decided looks effortless. The acceptable range is narrow. A contestant may be considered too thin, too heavy, too straight, too broad, or simply not balanced correctly. The judgment is rarely presented as cruelty. It arrives as helpful advice from adults who insist they are only improving her chances. A coach may suggest losing a few pounds before the next competition. A seamstress may recommend a different neckline to improve the proportions. A mother may quietly remove bread from the dinner plate, while explaining that the gown will fit more beautifully in 2 weeks. No one needs to order a contestant to starve herself. They scale the dress, fitting the published measurements and the knowledge that judges will be watching. Create the instruction without anyone having to say it directly. Meals become calculations. Breakfast grows smaller, desserts disappear, and water may replace food during the final days before the event. The contestant is praised for discipline, which makes it difficult to distinguish healthy preparation from fear of arriving 1 pound above expectation. The scale becomes a second judging panel. It cannot be charmed by a smile, impressed by a piano performance, or persuaded by a graceful interview answer. It offers one number, and the contestant has already been taught exactly how she should feel about it. Foundation garments provide another solution. A girdle can compress the waist, smooth the hips, and reshape the body beneath an evening gown. The contestant may struggle to breathe comfortably, but from the judge's table the silhouette appears controlled, polished, and entirely natural. Many young women accepted these practices because everyone around them treated the measurements as objective truth. If the tape said the waist was too large, then the problem appeared to belong to the body, rather than to the standard created for judging it. Some contestants felt proud when the numbers moved in the desired direction. Approval followed immediately from coaches, relatives, and pageant officials. The body became a project, and each lost pound or tightened inch was presented as proof of commitment. Others began carrying the measurements long after the competition ended. The scale might disappear, the gown might be packed away, and the pageant photographs might fade, but the habit of evaluating the body from the outside could remain for decades. By the time the contestant stepped onto the stage, the audience saw a balanced silhouette beneath a beautiful gown. They did not see the tape measure the reduced meals, the repeated fittings, or the quiet fear that one uncontrolled inch might erase months of preparation. And once the pageant had decided that the body could be measured, it still needed to be displayed. The next test would place the contestant in a swimsuit and a pair of heels, and ask everyone in the room to pretend they were evaluating nothing more personal than health and poise. Once the tape measure had approved the contestant's proportions, the pageant needed to display them. She was given a one-piece swimsuit, a pair of high heels, and a brightly lit stage where everyone politely agreed that they were evaluating health, posture, and poise. Imagine that you're standing backstage in 1956 wearing less fabric than you would normally consider appropriate for a public appearance. A pageant assistant checks the fit of the swimsuit, while your mother reminds you to keep your shoulders back and avoid looking uncomfortable. The swimsuit is modest by later standards, but it is not an ordinary garment. It may contain padded cups, reinforced seams, boning, and hidden support panels designed to lift smooth compress and arrange the body into the silhouette the judges expect to see. Choosing the correct suit requires strategy. A dark colour may make the waist appear smaller, while a lighter shade may attract attention beneath the stage lights. The neckline, leg opening, and internal structure are studied with the seriousness of military planning. Then there are the shoes. Walking in high heels is already a skill, but walking in heels while wearing a swimsuit under hot lights before an audience of strangers requires a different level of concentration. Every step must appear relaxed even when the contestant is calculating where to place her foot. The walk has been rehearsed many times. She moves toward the center of the stage, pauses, turns toward the judges, and holds the position long enough for them to inspect her, without making the inspection feel obvious. The judges take notes while the audience watches quietly. Officially, they are assessing physical fitness, carriage, and confidence. In practice, they are examining the body of a young woman and deciding how closely it matches the proportions their culture has chosen to reward. The formal setting makes the process appear respectable. There are flowers, flags, scorecards, and a master of ceremonies speaking in the careful language of wholesome competition. The ceremony allows everyone to avoid describing exactly what is happening. The contestant helps maintain the illusion. She smiles as though standing nearly undressed before local businessmen is the most natural experience of her life. She cannot cross her arms, look embarrassed, or move too quickly toward the safety of the curtain. Her body must appear healthy but not athletic enough to seem masculine, curved but not heavy, mature but still innocent, attractive enough to hold attention while appearing completely unaware that she is attracting it. Some contestants felt confident during the swimsuit portion. They had trained, practiced, and learned how to control the stage. Others experienced it as the most exposing part of the competition, but the pageant offered no additional points for admitting discomfort. When the walk ended, the contestant returned backstage and changed quickly into something with more fabric. The judges added their scores, the audience moved on, and everyone behaved as though the evaluation had been entirely ordinary. The swimsuit competition revealed one of the pageant's central contradictions. A respectable young woman was expected to guard her modesty, yet winning required her to display her body publicly and accept the judgment with a cheerful expression. The contradiction survived because the pageant gave it a formal name. This was not a body inspection. It was a demonstration of poise, health, and confidence conducted beneath flattering lights, with a trophy waiting somewhere beyond the curtain. But physical beauty alone was never supposed to be enough. Once the contestant had displayed the approved body, she had to prove that she possessed accomplishments as well. The swimsuit was carried away, the piano was rolled onto the stage, and somewhere backstage a young woman prepared to twirl a baton as though her future depended on it. Once the swimsuit portion had displayed the contestant's body, the pageant needed to prove that she possessed something more. Beauty alone was officially considered insufficient, so the stage was cleared, the piano was rolled into position, and the talent competition began. Imagine that you're waiting behind the curtain in 1957, wearing a costume covered in sequins and holding a baton that suddenly feels much heavier than it did during rehearsal. The contestant before you is singing an operatic aria, and the audience appears impressed enough to create a small personal crisis. The talent portion included piano recitals, tap dancing, classical singing, dramatic monologues, accordion performances, ventriloquism, and enough baton twirling to suggest that every town in America had quietly invested in a supply of batons after the war. Baton twirling became especially common because it combined athletic skill stage movements, sparkling costumes, and a small but exciting possibility of disaster. A dropped baton could roll toward the judges' table, which was not the kind of memorable performance most contestants intended to give. The talent itself was never chosen only for enjoyment. It had to look impressive from a distance, fit within the time limit, flatter the contestant, and communicate the correct kind of accomplishment. A young woman could be talented in many ways, but only certain talents looked suitable beneath stage lights. Classical music suggested discipline and refinement. Ballet appeared graceful and feminine. Tap dancing offered energy without controversy. A dramatic monologue could demonstrate intelligence, although expressing too much emotional intensity risked making the judges uncomfortable. The contestant trained for months or years to create a performance lasting only a few minutes. She practiced at home while her father pretended to be the audience her mother watched for mistakes, and the family listened to the same piano passage often enough to develop a complicated relationship with it. The costume required its own planning. A singer needed an elegant gown, a dancer required freedom of movement, and a baton twirler needed enough sequins to remain visible from the back row without looking as though she'd been decorated by an overly enthusiastic chandelier. When the curtain opened, the contestant had to begin immediately. There was no time to explain nerves, a poor night of sleep, or the fact that the accompanist had chosen a tempo slightly faster than the one used in rehearsal. A wrong piano note, a cracked voice, or a missed step could undo months of preparation in a few seconds. The contestant was expected to recover without changing her expression, because continuing gracefully after a mistake was considered almost as important as avoiding the mistake. The judges attempted to translate performance into points. Technique, presentation, difficulty, originality, and overall impression appeared on the score sheet, but personal taste remained difficult to remove. A judge who loved opera might reward a modest singer more generously than an excellent tap dancer. The talent portion therefore appeared objective while remaining deeply subjective. A contestant could perform the best routine of her life and still lose points because someone at the judging table had never cared for the accordion, and yet this part of the competition gave many contestants a genuine chance to be recognized for something they had worked hard to master. The skill was real, the discipline was real, and the pride after a strong performance could be more meaningful than the crown itself, but the pageant preferred talent that supported the approved image of womanhood rather than challenging it. A contestant could be accomplished, but her accomplishment should remain charming, graceful, and carefully contained within the length of the performance. She was expected to demonstrate ambition without appearing consumed by it. She could impress the audience but not frighten them with the possibility that her talent might matter more to her than marriage, family, or the role the decade had already prepared. When the music ended, she held the final pose, smiled, and waited for the applause. The audience saw 2 minutes of polished accomplishment, but they did not see the years of lessons, the family expenses, the failed rehearsals, or the private fear of making one irreversible mistake. Then she returned backstage carrying the baton sheet music or costume that had just been transformed into a score. The judges wrote their numbers, the next contestant waited, and the pageant moved forward. But even the strongest talent could not save a contestant whose expression appeared cold, nervous, or unhappy. The pageant did not merely require her to perform, it required her to look delighted while performing, which meant the next skill was the one she carried through every portion of the evening, the smile that was never allowed to disappear. The smile followed the contestant everywhere. It appeared during the swimsuit walk, the talent performance, the interview, the photographs, the rehearsals, and even the quiet moments when nothing particularly pleasant was happening. Imagine that you're standing before a bedroom mirror in 1956. Your mother is behind you, studying your face while you smile again and again until the expression looks warm, natural, and completely unrelated to the fact that you have been practicing it for 20 minutes. The pageant smile had rules. It could not be too small because that looked cold. It could not be too wide because that looked desperate. It needed to reach the eyes, reveal the correct amount of teeth, and remain steady while the rest of the body was under pressure. Contestants learned to control the details. The chin should not lift too far, the lips should not pull unevenly, and the eyes should appear bright rather than tired. Some practiced with photographs, comparing one expression to another, as though studying a technical problem. The smile also had to survive physical discomfort. The contestant might be standing in tight shoes, wearing a heavy gown, breathing against a girdle, and waiting beneath hot stage lights. But none of that was supposed to reach her face. A practical technique was to place the tongue lightly behind the upper teeth, which helped the lips appear relaxed. Some contestants used a small amount of petroleum jelly on the teeth to prevent dry lips from sticking during long periods of smiling. The expression became a kind of uniform. Before entering a room, facing a camera, or meeting a sponsor, the contestant could switch it on immediately. The private face disappeared, and the approved public version took its place. Photographers made the smile even more important. A contestant could be captured at breakfast, during rehearsal, beside a sponsor, or while waiting near the stage. One poorly timed photograph might make her appear tired, unfriendly, or insufficiently grateful. The smile was expected after mistakes as well. If a baton fell, a piano note went wrong, or a heel slipped during the walk, the contestant had to recover without showing alarm. A calm smile reassured the audience that nothing serious had happened. It was also required in defeat. When another woman's name was announced, the runner-up had to applaud while smiling toward the new winner. Her disappointment might be real, but allowing it to appear would create a second failure after the first. This constant performance divided the contestant into two versions of herself. One version felt tired, frightened, disappointed, competitive, or angry. The other stood in public and communicated only warmth, gratitude, and complete emotional control. Many women became remarkably skilled at maintaining that separation. The ability could help them in later work, public speaking, and social situations, but it could also teach them to distrust any feeling that did not look attractive from the outside. By the end of a long pageant day, the muscles of the face could ache almost as much as the feet. The smile had been held through rehearsals, photographs, meals, introductions, interviews, and hours of waiting, yet the next camera still expected it to appear fresh. The pageant treated this ability as poise. A woman who could hide discomfort, disappointment, and exhaustion behind a pleasant expression was considered graceful, disciplined, and worthy of representing the organization. Then the evening gown was brought forward, and the same smile had to continue beneath satin chiffon and layers of careful construction. The face was expected to look effortless, even when the dress beneath it had required weeks of labor and nearly as much engineering as the stage itself. The evening gown was supposed to create the final illusion. After the measurements, the swimsuit, the talent performance, and the practice smile, the contestant stepped onto the stage wearing a dress that made months of preparation look like something effortless. Imagine that you're standing inside a department store in 1957 while your mother and a saleswoman study 3 gowns arranged around you. One is too plain, another is too mature, and the third is beautiful, but costs enough to make the room briefly uncomfortable. The correct gown had to flatter the contestant from every direction. It needed to narrow the waist, lengthen the body, move gracefully during the walk, and remain impressive beneath stage lights that could make an ordinary fabric look dull. Colour required careful consideration. White and pale blue suggested innocence. Pink appeared youthful, and darker shades created a more sophisticated image. Red could command the room, but it could also make a contestant appear too bold for judges who preferred their confidence in smaller portions. Many gowns were made or altered by local seamstresses. Mothers brought magazine clippings, fabric samples, and optimistic descriptions of dresses that had been designed for women with different bodies, larger budgets, and considerably more time. The fittings could continue for weeks. A seam was tightened, the hem was shortened, the neckline was adjusted, and the waist was taken in again after the contestant lost a few pounds. Every correction promised to make the finished dress look as though no correction had ever been necessary. The construction beneath the visible fabric was often considerable. Boning supported the bodice, layers of tulle held the skirt outward, and hidden fastenings kept everything in place. The gown looked soft and romantic, but parts of it had more in common with architecture than clothing. Walking in the dress required another round of rehearsal. A full skirt could catch beneath the heel, while a narrow gown restricted the length of each step. The contestant practiced turning climbing stairs and sitting without crushing the fabric or revealing how difficult any of it was. The dressing room created its own problems. Several contestants, each surrounded by a wide skirt. Garment bags, mothers, and assistants attempted to move through a space designed for far fewer people. A careless turn could disturb another woman's hair, or sweep cosmetics from a table. The gown also carried the family's investment onto the stage. Some families saved for months, borrowed money, reused fabric, or relied on a talented relative who worked late into the night. The finished dress represented more than taste. It represented time sacrifice and the hope that the judges would notice quality. When the contestant finally stepped beneath the lights, the audience saw satin chiffon sequins and graceful movement. They did not see the pins used during the final fitting, the anxious discussion over cost, or the seamstress repairing a loose fastening shortly before the curtain opened. The judges evaluated the complete presentation. They considered whether the dress suited the contestant, whether she carried it confidently, and whether the overall image matched their idea of elegance. A beautiful gown could help her, but appearing uncomfortable inside it could erase the advantage. So she walked slowly, turned carefully, and smiled as though the dress weighed nothing. The skirt moved behind her, the fabric caught the light, and the months of decisions disappeared inside a few polished seconds. The gown appeared to transform the contestant into the ideal woman of the evening. But beneath the satin and tulle was another structure doing quieter work, compressing the waist, smoothing the hips, restricting each breath, and ensuring that the body itself matched the dress. The gown created the fantasy everyone could see. The girdle underneath made the fantasy possible, and unlike the gown, it was never meant to receive applause. Beneath the satin chiffon and careful elegance of the evening gown was the garment doing most of the physical work. The girdle shaped the waist, smoothed the hips, controlled the stomach, and quietly reminded the contestant that the natural body was not considered ready for the stage. Imagine that you're sitting in a hotel dressing room in 1957, holding a tightly constructed girdle made from elastic nylon and rubber. It looks smaller than the body expected to enter it, which is not reassuring, but nobody in the room appears surprised. Putting it on is less like getting dressed and more like completing a difficult household task. The garment must be rolled, pulled, adjusted, and lifted gradually into position, while the contestant tries to preserve both her balance and her dignity. Sometimes another woman helps. A mother sister or pageant assistant grips one side while the contestant pulls the other, and together they force the garment into place with the quiet cooperation of people who have done this before. Once the girdle reaches the waist, every section must lie flat. A folded edge beneath the gown can create a visible line, and a visible line may draw the judge's eyes toward the very area the garment was designed to control. The effect is immediate. The waist appears smaller, the hips become smoother, and the gown settles into the approved silhouette. From the outside, the contestant looks elegant. From the inside, breathing has become a more carefully managed activity. The materials do not respond kindly to heat. Stage lights warm the auditorium, nervousness adds its own temperature, and the girdle traps everything close to the body. The contestant may feel sweat gathering beneath the fabric, but the gown and smile must remain untouched. Sitting becomes difficult. Bending becomes unwise. Eating a full meal before the competition becomes something the contestant may regret almost immediately. The girdle does not adapt to the evening adapts to the girdle, yet the garment is rarely described as punishment. Mothers, coaches, and saleswomen call it support. It gives the dress a proper foundation, improves posture, and helps the contestant feel secure beneath the lights. Many women accepted this explanation completely. The girdle held everything in place, prevented unwanted movement, and created the silhouette expected in photographs. Choosing not to wear one could be interpreted as carelessness rather than comfort. The pageant contestant therefore learned to experience restriction as preparation. Pressure around the waist became proof that the body was being properly managed, just as aching feet proved the shoes were elegant and hairpins proved the hairstyle was secure. From the judges' table, none of this was visible. They saw a narrow waist, a smooth gown, and a woman who appeared completely comfortable. The more uncomfortable the structure beneath the dress, the more successful the illusion could become. After the competition, removing the girdle produced a small private moment of relief. The contestant could finally take a full breath, allow the body to return to its ordinary shape, and feel the marks the garment had pressed into the skin. But the pageant did not reward the ordinary body. It rewarded the body after compression, correction, and control. The girdle was not simply underwear. It was the physical expression of an era that believed a woman's shape should be managed before it was allowed to appear in public. And once the body had been compressed into the correct silhouette, the contestant still had to learn how to move inside it. The next lesson would return her to the living room floor, place a book on her head, and teach her that even walking required correction. Once the girdle had shaped the body, the pageant still needed to teach that body how to move. Walking was no longer a simple way to cross a room. It became a performance of discipline, femininity, and control. Imagine that you are standing in your family living room in 1956 with a heavy book balanced on your head. Your mother sits nearby watching your shoulders, your chin, and the distance between each step with the concentration of someone inspecting important machinery. The book is an unforgiving teacher. If your neck tilts your shoulders round or your stride becomes careless, it falls to the carpet and announces the mistake without sympathy. You pick it up, place it back on your head, and begin again. The shoulders must remain back, but not so far back that the posture looks military. The chin must be lifted, but not high enough to suggest arrogance. The spine must appear straight and relaxed, although relaxation is difficult when every part of the body is being consciously managed. The length of each step is corrected as well. A stride that is too long may appear aggressive, while one that is too short can look timid. The ideal walk occupies the narrow space between confidence and modesty, where nearly every rule of 1950s womanhood seemed to live. The feet require special attention. They should point forward, land carefully, and avoid drawing attention downward. The judges are meant to notice the complete woman, not the uncomfortable shoes, performing emergency calculations beneath her gown. Then comes the runway turn. At the end of the stage, the contestant must stop, pivot, face the judges, and hold the position for exactly the correct amount of time. A pause that is too short looks nervous, while one that lasts too long begins to resemble a demand for attention. The hands must remain quiet during this moment. They cannot clasp tightly, adjust the dress, touch the hair, or reveal that the contestant has no idea what to do with them. They rest naturally at her sides after several weeks of practice, devoted to making them look natural. Stairs create another problem. A full gown can hide the feet catch beneath a heel and turn 3 ordinary steps into a public test of survival. Contestants rehearse lifting the skirt slightly without exposing too much or appearing to struggle with the fabric. The walk must also change with each costume. A swimsuit allows longer steps, while a narrow evening gown requires a controlled glide. A full skirt needs enough movement to show the fabric, but not enough to make the contestant look as though she is fighting the dress. By the time the competition begins, every movement has been repeated until it appears automatic. The contestant no longer simply walks toward the judges. She enters, pauses, turns, presents herself, and exits, according to a sequence her muscles have been trained to remember. A mistake can still happen. A heel may catch the floor, may feel slippery, or the gown may move differently beneath the stage lights. The rule remains the same: recover immediately, continue smiling, and behave as though the unexpected movement was part of the choreography. The judges call this poise. They reward the contestant who appears calm, elegant, and completely at home on the stage. They do not see the books, the corrected shoulders, the aching calves, or the hundreds of careful steps taken across a living room carpet. What they see is a young woman who seems to have been born moving this way. The labour has disappeared, leaving only the illusion that grace is natural for some women and absent from others. But the walk brings her only as far as the judging table. Once she arrives there, she must stop moving, look directly at the panel, and answer questions about marriage, family, ambition, and America, without saying anything that might make the room uncomfortable. Once the contestant had crossed the stage successfully, she faced a challenge that could not be solved with posture sequins or a carefully fitted gown. She had to sit before the judges, smile calmly, and answer personal questions without revealing anything that might make the room uncomfortable. Imagine that you are seated beneath bright lights in 1957, while a judge asks what America means to you. You have less than a minute to sound intelligent, sincere, patriotic, warm, and completely spontaneous, even though you have practiced several versions of this answer at home. The questions often appeared simple. What is the most important quality in a woman? What do you hope to accomplish in life? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you plan to marry? What would you do if you won the crown? But each question contained an invisible boundary. The judges wanted a thoughtful answer, but not one that challenged the values of the room. They wanted personality, but only the kind of personality that could be presented safely to sponsors, newspapers, and families watching from home. Contestants prepared by studying lists of likely questions. Mothers and coaches helped shape answers around family education, faith, kindness, community service, and patriotism. These subjects were dependable because almost no respectable judge could object to them. The contestant was not usually told to memorize every sentence. A fully memorized answer might sound mechanical. Instead, she learned the structure, acknowledge the question, offer one clear idea, connect it to family or service, and finish with a warm statement that left no room for controversy. A question about ambition required special care. She could say she wanted an education, meaningful work, or an opportunity to help others. But if she suggested that professional success mattered more than marriage or domestic life, the answer might begin to feel too modern for the judging table. Questions about marriage were even more delicate. The ideal response expressed hope for a husband and family someday, while also showing enough independence to seem interesting before that future arrived. She had to appear available for marriage without appearing eager enough to make anyone uncomfortable. Political questions were dangerous because even a reasonable opinion could divide the room. The safest answer praised citizenship, freedom, responsibility, and national unity, without mentioning any actual disagreement occurring in the country at the time. The judges called this portion a test of intelligence and character. In reality, it often tested whether a contestant could detect the approved answer quickly and deliver it with enough warmth to make strategy look like sincerity. Some contestants became remarkably skilled at this. They could hear a difficult question, identify its safest emotional center, and produce a polished response before anyone noticed that the true answer had never entered the room. This ability required intelligence, but not necessarily the kind the pageant claimed to reward. It was the intelligence of reading authority, understanding expectations, and editing the self in real time. A contestant might privately feel uncertain about marriage, angry about a social issue, or deeply ambitious in a way the judges would not welcome. On stage, those thoughts remained hidden behind words about family, gratitude, education, and service. The safest contestant was therefore not the woman with the fewest opinions. She was the woman who understood which opinions could be spoken aloud and which ones should remain carefully folded away. When the interview ended, the judges marked their score sheets and praised her poise. They had not discovered who she truly was. They had discovered how well she could present the version of herself they already hoped to find. And once private judgment had been transformed into points, the power moved back to the long table beneath the white cloth. The next question was no longer what the contestant believed, but who the men holding the scorecards believed the ideal woman should be. Once the interview ended, the contestant stepped away from the microphone, but the real decision remained at the long table beneath the white cloth. Several men lowered their pencils toward the score sheets and prepared to decide which young woman most closely resembled the ideal their community already believed in. Imagine that you are standing beneath the stage lights in 1957, while 5 judges study you from a few yards away. One is a banker, another owns a department store, one edits the local newspaper, and another represents the civic organization sponsoring the pageant. Their authority comes from their position in the town, not from any special training in judging women. The panel is usually presented as respectable and impartial. The judges wear dark suits, sit behind neatly arranged papers, and listen with serious expressions. Everything about the scene suggests careful evaluation, although the categories they are evaluating are difficult to define with any precision. The score sheet gives the process an appearance of science. There are separate spaces for beauty, poise, personality, talent, and overall impression. Each category receives a number, and the numbers are eventually added together, as though elegance, charm, and suitability can be measured with the same certainty as arithmetic. But a number does not remove personal preference. One judge may prefer a glamorous contestant, while another wants the familiar girl-next-door type. One may reward confidence, while another may find the same confidence too bold. The score sheet records the opinion, but it does not explain where the opinion came from. The categories themselves are open enough to hold almost any judgment. Poise may mean graceful movement, emotional control, good manners, or simply looking comfortable while being watched. Personality may mean warmth, obedience, humour, modesty, or whatever quality a particular judge happens to admire in women. The judges are not only selecting a beautiful contestant, they are deciding which woman can represent the community without creating discomfort. She must look impressive in a photograph, speak safely to a newspaper, appear beside sponsors, and behave in a way that confirms rather than challenges local expectations. In many pageants, the judges are overwhelmingly male. They assess young women's bodies, voices, talents, ambitions, and personalities, while the arrangement is treated as completely natural. The men are understood to represent community standards, even though the women being measured have little role in defining those standards themselves. Personal background can influence the room as well. At a local competition, a judge may know a contestant's father attend church with her family, or purchase goods from the business sponsoring her. Everyone may promise fairness, but small towns rarely contain truly anonymous people. Some judges take the task very seriously. They study each contestant, compare notes, and struggle to make a responsible decision. Others form an impression within the first few seconds and spend the remaining time finding numbers that make the score sheet agree with what they have already decided. The contestant cannot question any of this. She cannot ask why one judge marked her lower, whether her answer was misunderstood, or whether the colour of her gown affected someone's mood. She receives the result and is expected to accept it with the same gracious expression she displayed during the competition. When the scores are added, the final total looks official. A winner emerges by several points, perhaps even by a fraction, and the precision gives the decision an authority it may not deserve. Personal taste, cultural assumptions, and private bias disappear beneath a clean line of arithmetic. The judges have not discovered the objectively best woman in the room. They have selected the contestant who most successfully confirms their shared image of what an ideal woman should be: attractive, controlled, accomplished, agreeable, and safe enough to place beside the town's name. Once the crown is awarded, however, the judge's work is finished. The winner now belongs to a different group of men waiting beyond the scorecards: sponsors, organisers, advertisers, and business representatives who have already planned where she will appear, what she will wear, and how her newly approved image will be used. Once the judges placed the crown on the winner's carefully arranged hair, the commercial work began. The applause had barely ended before sponsors, organisers, photographers, and business representatives started preparing to use the new beauty queen's face. Imagine that you're standing backstage in 1957 with a crown on your head and a bouquet in your arms. You're still trying to understand what has happened when someone places a schedule in front of you and explains where you must appear the following morning. The pageant crown often came with a contract. It governed public appearances, clothing, travel interviews, photograph sponsor obligations, and the behaviour expected from the winner during her year of representation. The winner might be required to attend department store openings, county fairs, charity dinners, television programs, dealership promotions, and civic events. Every appearance was presented as an honour, even when it required hours of travel and an entire day spent smiling beside a product. Sponsors expected visibility in return for their support. A swimwear company wanted the winner photographed in its suits. A cosmetics brand wanted its products associated with her face, and a department store wanted customers to believe that officially beautiful women shopped there. The winner's image could appear in newspapers, advertisements, brochures, and promotional displays. She had become more than a contestant. She was now a symbol of approval that businesses could place beside whatever they wanted the public to admire. Her clothing was often carefully managed. She might receive dresses, shoes, cosmetics, or accessories from sponsors, but these gifts also created obligations. Wearing a competitor's product could become a problem, even if the winner had purchased it herself before the pageant. The schedule could be exhausting. One week might include a school assembly, a luncheon, a parade, a hospital visit, and the opening of a new appliance showroom. Each event required the same polished hair, careful makeup, approved outfit, and full-strength smile. The contract also reached into personal behaviour. The winner was expected to avoid scandal, controversial opinions, public arguments, and any situation that might make the organisation or its sponsors uncomfortable. Her private life had become part of the product. She could not simply wake up tired and decide not to appear. The crown had transformed her calendar into an asset managed by other people. Her time belonged partly to the organisation that had selected her and the companies that had financed the stage. Some winners genuinely enjoyed the year. They travelled, met important people, gained confidence, and developed public speaking skills that helped them long after the crown was gone. The opportunities were real, but so were the restrictions attached to them. The arrangement worked because the pageant and the winner both received something valuable. She received visibility, prestige, and possible opportunities. The sponsors received an attractive, publicly approved representative who could sell products without ever appearing to make a sales pitch. By the end of the reigning year, the winner might have attended hundreds of events and appeared in countless photographs. The crown still looked like a prize, but it had functioned like a uniform for a demanding public job, and the job did not end at the edge of the stage. The organisation continued watching her weight clothing relationships, opinions, and public behaviour. Winning had not freed her from judgment. It had simply expanded the number of people allowed to judge her. Winning did not bring the pageant experience to an end. It transformed the winner from a contestant into a full-time public representative whose schedule, appearance, and behaviour were now managed by the organisation behind the crown. Imagine that you wake in a hotel room the morning after winning. The crown rests beside a bouquet that has already begun to wilt while a pageant official explains that your first public appearance begins in less than 2 hours. The schedule may include television interviews, newspaper photographs, luncheons, parades, school visits, hospital appearances, and ribbon cuttings. Some events are glamorous, while others involve standing beside a new supermarket freezer and smiling as though refrigeration has changed your life. Travel becomes a regular part of the year. The winner may move between towns by car, train, or airplane, sleeping in unfamiliar rooms, and eating whatever is available between appointments. The crown travels in a protective case, while the woman carrying it receives considerably less protection from exhaustion. Every appearance requires preparation. Hair must be arranged, makeup applied, clothing approved, and the smile restored before the first camera appears. A tired face can become a newspaper photograph, and the newspaper will not explain that the winner slept only 4 hours. The public expects gratitude at every stop. She must appear delighted to meet local officials, sponsors, children, journalists, and customers waiting inside a department store. No event is allowed to look unimportant, even when it feels exactly that way after the 5th appearance of the week. Chaperones or pageant representatives may travel with her. They help organise the schedule, introduce her to hosts, and make sure she arrives on time. They also observe her behaviour, clothing conversations, and the amount of enthusiasm she displays when she thinks nobody important is watching. Her body remains under review. A noticeable change in weight may lead to a private conversation about maintaining the image selected by the judges. The crown has not ended the measurements. It has made the approved measurements more valuable to the organisation. Her opinions require the same careful management. A winner may speak about education, kindness, family service, and national pride. She's less welcome to express strong political views, criticise a sponsor, or reveal that the reigning year is more difficult than the pageant brochure suggested. The scholarship and public attention may create genuine opportunities. She meets people outside her hometown, becomes comfortable speaking before large audiences, and may gain access to education, entertainment modelling, or professional work that once seemed impossible. But the reigning year can also interrupt the future it was supposed to support. College may be delayed, relationships may be placed on hold, and ordinary life becomes difficult to maintain when nearly every weekend belongs to an appearance scheduled by someone else. The winner lives inside a strange contradiction. She has become more visible and important than ever before, yet she has less control over her time, appearance, and public identity. Rooms are organised around her arrival, but the direction of her life is often organised by others. When the year finally ends, another young woman steps onto the stage and receives the crown. The former winner returns to ordinary life carrying public speaking skills, photographs, memories, and the unsettling experience of becoming yesterday's beauty queen in a single evening. The crown offered recognition in a decade that gave young women few paths toward public importance. But recognition came with rules, and many of those rules reached far beyond the schedule. They followed the winner into her private relationships, her future plans, and even the question of whether she was allowed to marry. The pageant rules did not remain inside the auditorium. They followed the winner into restaurants, hotel rooms, family gatherings, private conversations, and every ordinary place where she was still expected to behave as though the crown were watching. Imagine that you are 19 years old in 1957 and have just become the official representative of your state. You return home wearing the sash, but the contract returns with you quietly explaining that your private life is no longer entirely private. Marriage is usually forbidden during the reigning year. The winner is expected to remain single because the pageant has crowned an eligible young woman, not a wife whose attention may belong to a husband and a household, rather than to sponsors and public appearances. A serious boyfriend can therefore become a problem. Dates must remain discreet, engagements may need to wait, and any photograph suggesting excessive intimacy can create concern among officials responsible for protecting the pageant's wholesome image. Pregnancy is an even more absolute disqualification. A pregnant winner disrupts the carefully maintained picture of innocence and availability, revealing a private adult life that the organization prefers the public not to imagine. The rules also govern appearance. A dramatic haircut, a noticeable change in weight or clothing considered too revealing, may lead to a quiet conversation with an official who describes the correction as friendly advice. Public behavior is watched just as closely. The winner must avoid arguments, excessive drinking, late-night parties, questionable companions, and any setting that might produce an unflattering photograph or an enthusiastic piece of local gossip. Politics requires particular caution. She may praise freedom, citizenship, family, and community service, but supporting a controversial cause or criticizing public authorities could make sponsors nervous and transform a beauty queen into a public relations problem. Even ordinary frustration must remain private. She cannot complain openly about the schedule, criticize the judges, admit that the crown feels restrictive, or suggest that the pageant has demanded more than it originally promised. The organization does not need to watch her constantly. Neighbors, reporters, sponsors, civic leaders, and family acquaintances form an informal network of observation. A single telephone call can carry news of her behavior back to pageant officials before she returns home. Most violations begin with a warning. An official reminds her of the responsibility she accepted, her mother encourages her not to waste the opportunity, and the winner apologizes for whatever moment of ordinary humanity has attracted attention. More serious violations can cost her the crown. The first runner-up may be called forward. The organization issues a careful statement, and the former winner is expected to disappear quietly enough that the public remembers the title rather than the scandal. The rules reveal what the pageant believed it had actually crowned. Not merely a talented young woman, but a controlled public image whose body, relationships, opinions, and future plans had to remain useful to the organization. She had won visibility, but visibility came with surveillance. The crown made her important while requiring her to live inside a narrower version of herself, one considered attractive, respectable, unmarried, agreeable, and safe. And even that narrow path was not available to every woman. Long before the judges considered talent or poise, the pageant world had already decided which races, communities, and versions of American beauty were allowed onto its most important stages. The pageant world spoke constantly about finding the ideal American woman, but it did not invite every American woman to compete. In much of the 1950s, the largest and most visible stages presented a version of beauty that was overwhelmingly white and treated that exclusion as though it were simply part of the scenery. Imagine that you are a talented young black woman in 1953. You can sing, speak confidently, walk with poise, and meet every public standard the pageant claims to value. Yet the national competition shown in newspapers and on television does not appear to include a place for you. Earlier pageant rules had openly restricted contestants by race. Even when explicit language was removed, the habits, local systems, and expectations built around these rules did not disappear. A rule could vanish from a page while its intended result remained visible on the stage. The absence of black contestants required very little explanation from white audiences. The competition was presented as national, the winner was presented as representative, and almost nobody on the broadcast paused to ask which women had never been allowed into the room. This exclusion reflected the larger structure of 1950s America. Schools, neighborhoods, hotels, restaurants, and public institutions were divided by race, sometimes through law, and sometimes through customs enforced just as effectively. The beauty pageant did not invent this social order. It reproduced it beneath flowers and stage lights. By repeatedly crowning one narrow image of American womanhood, it taught audiences whose beauty was considered suitable for national celebration. Black communities responded by building pageants of their own. These competitions appeared at colleges, community organizations, regional festivals, and events supported by black businesses, newspapers, educators, and civic leaders. These stages were not merely imitations of the white pageant world. They created public spaces where black women could be recognized for beauty education, talent leadership, and community service in a society that routinely denied them that visibility elsewhere. And historically, black colleges and universities' pageant titles could carry deep institutional meaning. A winner represented her school, appeared at major events, and became part of a tradition connecting beauty with scholarship, dignity, service, and cultural pride. The black press covered these women with an attention the mainstream press rarely offered. Photographs, interviews, and competition reports allowed winners to become visible within communities that understood how significant public recognition could be in a segregated country. The standards within these pageants were not free from pressure. Contestants still faced judgments about appearance, complexion, hair, class, manners, and the correct way to represent respectable womanhood. Creating a separate stage did not remove every narrow expectation from the culture surrounding it, but the crown could still hold genuine power. It told a young woman that her face, voice, education, and ambition were worthy of public celebration even when the dominant institutions of the country acted as though she were invisible. Many contestants went on to become teachers, professionals, organizers, mothers, businesswomen, and community leaders. Their pageant histories were often preserved in school archives, family albums, and black newspapers, rather than in the national broadcasts later treated as the complete story of the decade. To look only at the famous white winners is therefore to mistake visibility for existence. The women excluded from the main stage were still competing, organizing, celebrating, and creating their own forms of recognition beyond the cameras of white America. And while national pageants enforced exclusion through institutions and tradition, local competitions added another layer of judgment. In small towns, the contestants, judges, mothers, sponsors, and neighbors often knew one another, personally turning the pageant into a contest of beauty, family reputation, old rivalries, and community power. The national pageants had television cameras, famous sponsors, and carefully managed judges. The local pageant had 3 folding tables, a borrowed curtain, a trophy ordered from a catalogue, and an audience containing nearly everyone the contestants had ever met. Imagine that you're 17 years old in 1956 competing for the title of County Fair Queen. One judge attends your church, another does business with your father, and the third is related by marriage to the contestant standing 2 places behind you. Nobody describes this as a conflict of interest. This is simply what happens in a small town where every respectable adult knows every other respectable adult, and familiarity is treated as evidence of good judgment. Family reputation enters the room before the contestant does. The daughter of a doctor, bank manager, business owner, or long-established local family may arrive with a kind of social confidence that cannot be listed on the score sheet, but is visible to everyone holding one. A contestant from a less prominent family must overcome more than nerves. Her dress may be handmade, her lessons fewer, and her name less familiar to the judges, even when her performance is stronger than those of the girls whose parents sit near the front. Behind many contestants stands a mother who has transformed the pageant into a serious family project. She remembers deadlines, arranges fittings, speaks with coaches, studies the competition, and knows exactly which judge smiled during which girl's rehearsal. Some mothers approach this work with warmth and restraint. They help their daughters prepare, provide encouragement, and understand that the girl on the stage must eventually decide how much the competition matters to her. Other mothers become more invested than the contestants themselves. A daughter's victory begins to represent years of sacrifice, personal ambition, family standing, and the possibility of being publicly recognized through someone else's crown. The mothers speak politely to one another backstage. They compliment dresses, ask about talents, and exchange cheerful wishes of good luck, while quietly observing fabric quality, posture, hairstyle, and every sign that another contestant may be difficult to defeat. Information moves through the room in careful fragments. Someone has heard that one judge prefers classical singing. Another mother mentions casually that a contestant became nervous during rehearsal. Nobody appears to be gathering intelligence, although nearly everyone is. The girls are expected to remain friendly through all of this. They help with zippers, share hairpins, compliment one another's gowns, and behave as though the crown is not a prize that only one of them can take home. The winner's name carries real weight in a small town. Her photograph appears in the local newspaper she rides in. The parade attends civic events and returns to school on Monday, with a title everyone understands, even if nobody outside the county ever hears it. The girls who lose return to the same school hallways, churches, shops, and neighborhoods as the winner. There is no distant hotel room in which to recover privately. The result follows them into ordinary life through comments, sympathetic smiles, and conversations that stop when they enter the room. Sometimes the judges choose the strongest contestant. Sometimes they choose the girl who best represents the town's existing social order. Most often the result contains some mixture of talent, beauty, family reputation, personal preference, and local politics that no score sheet can fully explain. The mothers go home carrying the result almost as intensely as their daughters do. One begins planning for the next competition, another insists the judging was unfair, and another quietly realizes that her daughter may not want to continue at all. But before anyone can walk away, there is the matter of losing correctly. The runner-up must stand beside the winner, applaud, smile for the photograph, and make sure that whatever she feels remains invisible until the curtain closes. Coming in second was supposed to be an honor. The first runner-up received flowers, applause, and a title of her own, but she also stood close enough to the crown to feel exactly how far away it had suddenly become. Imagine that you're standing beneath the lights in 1957 when another woman's name is announced. For one brief second the room becomes strangely quiet, and then your training takes over before your disappointment has time to reach your face. You begin applauding. You turn toward the winner, smile warmly, and step closer for the photograph. The camera captures generosity, poise, and perfect sportsmanship, while everything more complicated remains hidden just beyond the frame. Your mother is somewhere in the audience. She has spent months arranging lessons, fittings, photographs, and travel, and you know without looking that she is smiling too. Neither of you is ready to discuss what the result means. Backstage people tell you that you did wonderfully. They remind you that second place is still an achievement and that you should be proud. Every sentence is kind, but each one quietly confirms that the thing you wanted has gone to someone else. The emotional response is rarely simple. There may be disappointment, embarrassment, anger relief, and exhaustion arriving at the same time. Months of preparation have ended in a few spoken words, and the body does not always know which feeling to choose first. Some runners-up immediately begin planning the next competition. The loss becomes useful information. A different gown, a stronger talent, a few pounds lost a better interview answer, and perhaps the next group of judges will see what this one failed to recognize. Others feel an unexpected sense of freedom. The rehearsals are over, the measurements can stop, and the family calendar no longer belongs to the pageant. Losing may hurt, but it can also release a pressure the contestant did not fully understand until it disappeared. The title of first runner-up creates a strange position. She's publicly recognized as excellent, but nearly every introduction reminds people that someone else was considered slightly better. Her achievement remains attached to another woman's victory. Sometimes the runner-up is required to remain ready in case the winner cannot fulfill her duties. A marriage illness, contract violation, or private scandal may suddenly move the crown one place down the line. When this happens, the runner-up receives the title she almost won, but under circumstances she never imagined. The photograph schedule and responsibilities become hers, while the public quietly remembers that she was not the original choice. Most runners-up never receive that call. They return to schoolwork, church, and family life carrying a memory that can feel smaller or larger depending on the day. Some preserve the sash carefully, while others place it in a drawer and rarely look at it again. Years later, the loss may become a funny story, a source of pride, or a private wound that still feels surprisingly immediate. Nearly winning has a particular weight because it keeps the imagined future close enough to remain visible. But the pageant rarely asked what happened after the applause. It recorded the winner, printed her photograph, and moved forward. The girls who almost won were expected to manage the rest of the story quietly, with the same grace they had displayed beneath the lights, and many of them eventually discovered that walking away from the crown did not mean walking away from ambition. It meant finding other places to direct it beyond the stage, beyond the scorecard, and beyond the narrow version of success the pageant had offered them. Eventually every crown came off. Sometimes it happened in a crowded dressing room after the final photograph, and sometimes it happened 1 year later when the winner placed it on another young woman's carefully arranged hair. Imagine that you're sitting alone before a hotel mirror in 1958. The sash lies across a chair, the bouquet has begun to wilt, and the crown rests on the table looking much smaller without the stage lights beneath it. For the first time in months, nobody is asking you to smile. The shoes are off, the hairpins are scattered beside the powder compact, and the face in the mirror looks tired, ordinary, and more recognizable than the woman in the official photographs. Some women remembered the pageant years with genuine affection. They valued the friendships, travel, confidence, scholarships, and public speaking skills they gained from doing something difficult under enormous pressure. Others remembered the measurements, the restricted meals, the constant corrections, and the exhausting effort of appearing grateful, while strangers evaluated nearly every part of them. Many carried both memories at once. The pageant could create opportunity and insecurity, pride and embarrassment, discipline and self-doubt, all inside the same young woman. The winners moved into many different lives. Some entered modelling, entertainment, education, public service, or business. Others married, raised families, worked quietly, and became people whose later achievements had little connection to the crown. The women who lost also kept moving. They became teachers, nurses, writers, organisers, professionals, mothers, and business owners. The scorecards had claimed to measure their potential, but the judges had seen only a few minutes of lives that continued for decades. Even the women who walked away before the final competition carried something from the experience. They had learned how to stand before a room, control a nervous voice, read expectations, and recognize the moment when someone else's ambition had begun replacing their own. The pageant ideal did not remain on the stage. Millions of women watched from living rooms and received the same quiet message: this was what beauty looked like. This was how a woman should move, and this was the expression she should wear while being judged. But the following decades began questioning that message. Women asked who created the standards, who profited from them, and why a narrow image of perfection had been allowed to speak for every woman in America. Some former contestants became critics of the system. Others defended the pageants as meaningful experiences that had given them opportunities unavailable elsewhere. Both responses could be honest because the pageant had never meant exactly the same thing to every woman who entered it. What the 1950s beauty pageant truly rewarded was not beauty alone. It rewarded the ability to become legible to the culture, graceful, attractive, controlled, accomplished, unmarried, agreeable, and careful enough never to disturb the picture. The contestants were not foolish for wanting the crown. They were ambitious young women pursuing one of the few forms of public recognition the decade openly offered them. The tragedy was not that they wanted to be seen, but that the world had decided in advance what they were allowed to look like when it saw them. So tonight, as the theatre empties and the final stage lights go dark, spare a quiet thought for the women whose names were never announced. The runners-up, the rejected applicants, the contestants who walked away, and the women who watched from home knowing the ideal on the screen had no place for them. History remembered the crown, the gown, the bouquet, and the perfect smile. But the deeper story belonged to the women who removed all of it, took their first unrestricted breath, and began discovering who they were when nobody was holding a scorecard. The crown looked beautiful beneath the lights. It also carried the full weight of a decade's expectations. And when it finally came off, the woman underneath had an entire life left to become more than the pageant had ever known how to measure. Good night,